The intruder in the dark the night was quiet, almost too quiet. And the small human town lay under a blanket of darkness. Most houses had their lights off. Families were already asleep. And only the sound of crickets filled the air. The streets were empty. But inside one small house at the edge of town, something unusual was about to happen. Daniel, a middle-aged human man, returned home after a long day of work. He lived alone in a simple wooden house. Far from the busy center, he enjoyed the silence, the peace and the routine of his evenings. But tonight, as he pushed open the door, he immediately felt something strange. The air inside did not feel right. It carried a faint smell, not dust, not food, but something else, like wet earth and sweat. He placed his bag on the table and paused. Then he heard its soft footsteps. Coming from the back of the house, his heart jumped. At first, he thought maybe a thief had broken in. He reached for the metal rod he kept near the door for safety. His grip tightened as he moved silently across the floor. The sound of water dripping reached his ears. His eyes narrowed. It was coming from the bathroom. Daniel pushed the bathroom door open in one sudden move, ready to fight. But what he saw froze him in place. There, crouched by the shower, was not a thief, not a human, but a young alien girl. Her skin was pale with faint markings, her long hair tangled and caked with dirt. She was shivering, her hands trembling as she tried to wash herself under the weak stream of water. Her clothes were torn, barely covering her thin body, and her eyes were wide with fear. When she saw him, she gasped and quickly lowered her head. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, don't hurt me, please. Just let me wash. I'm so dirty." Daniel did not move. His mind raced. Why was an alien in his house? How had she gotten inside without him noticing? And why was she begging to wash instead of trying to escape? She looked weak, fragile, and terrified, not like someone who had come to steal or harm. The girl pressed herself against the wall, as if expecting him to hit her. Her shoulders shook. Her knees scraped against the floor. The metal rod in Daniel's hand suddenly felt heavy. He lowered it slowly, his anger replaced by confusion. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but low. The alien girl flinched at the sound of his voice. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head. I have no name," she muttered. "Please, I only wanted to wash. I will leave after. I promise." Her words cut through the silence like a knife. Daniel could see the dirt on her skin, the dried blood on her arm, the bruises along her neck. She looked like someone who had been running, hiding, and suffering for far too long. His heart, hardened by years of solitude, felt a pang of pity, but he also knew the danger. Aliens were not welcome here. If the guards discovered her in his house, he would be punished, maybe even killed. The dripping water echoed in the small room for a moment. Neither of them moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then the girl slowly reached for the soap with shaky hands, her voice trembling as she begged again, "Please. I am not here to harm you. I only wanted to feel clean, just once. I only wanted the dirt to go away." Her words sank deep into Daniel's mind. She wasn't an intruder. She wasn't a thief. She was broken, desperate, and lost. The fear in her eyes was not the fear of being caught, was the fear of being touched, beaten or thrown back into something worse than death. Daniel stepped back, his breathing slow. He lowered the metal rod completely and placed it on the floor. "Wash," he said finally, his voice heavy with an emotion he did not want to admit. Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. You will let me," she whispered. He gave a short nod. "Wash," he repeated. "I will not stop you, for the first time." Her shoulders relaxed a little. She turned back to the stream of water, her fingers carefully rubbing away layers of dirt. The water turned dark as it carried away the filth of her suffering. Daniel stood at the doorway, watching. Questions filled his head. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why did she risk her life to sneak into his house for something as simple as a shower? The girl closed her eyes as the water ran down her face. Her lips parted in a faint smile, sad but real. It was the smile of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be human, or at least treated like one. Daniel tightened his fists. He knew this was just the beginning. Letting her wash was one thing. But the moment she stepped out of that bathroom, his life would never be the same again. The night outside remained quiet, but inside his small house, a storm had just begun. The human's choice of the bathroom was filled with the soft sound of dripping water. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, staring at the alien girl. She kept her head low as she tried to scrub the dirt from her skin, her thin arms shaking with every movement. She looked less like a stranger and more like a broken child. Even though her features showed she was older, her back carried bruises, her shoulders carried scars, and her eyes carried fear. Daniel felt a storm inside. His mind whispered, "Call the guards, report her, stay safe." But his heart whispered something different. "She is not dangerous. She is only desperate," for a long moment. He said nothing. Finally, he walked away and sat in his wooden chair by the table. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to calm the chaos in his chest. The rules were clear. Aliens were not allowed in human homes without permission. Anyone who sheltered one would be punished, and yet could not forget the trembling in her voice when she said, "Please, just let me wash." A few minutes later, she stepped out of the bathroom. Still wet, wearing the same torn clothes, she stood silently at the doorway. Her hands folded in front of her chest. Her eyes looked at the ground, not daring to meet his. "I will leave now," she whispered, her voice weak. "Thank you for not hurting me." Daniel's eyes studied her. Her bare feet were covered in cuts, her knees were scraped, and her body looked thin, as if she had not eaten in days. She looked ready to collapse. If he let her walk out now, she would not survive the night. "Wait," he said, his tone sharp. She froze, her body stiff like a cornered animal. Daniel stood up slowly. "You cannot go outside like this." Her eyes lifted slightly, filled with fear. "I cannot stay," she whispered. "If they find me here, you will suffer too." The honesty in her words struck him. She was not only afraid for herself, but also for him. She was ready to leave and face death just to protect the human who had shown her a little kindness. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. "You broke into my house," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But instead of stealing, you begged for water. Instead of attacking, you begged for mercy." His eyes narrowed. "That tells me you are not a danger." Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. Daniel walked past her, opened a small cabinet, and pulled out an old blanket. He tossed it onto the chair. "Sit," he ordered. She looked at him, her expression shocked. "I said sit," he repeated, his tone harder. Slowly, carefully, she moved to the chair and sat down. Clutching the blanket around herself, Daniel poured her a small bowl of soup from the pot he had left on the stove earlier. The smell of food filled the room. Her eyes widened, and her stomach growled loudly. Daniel placed the bowl in front of her. "Eat," he said. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon, almost dropping it. Tears ran down her cheeks as she tasted the soup. It was the first real food she had eaten in days, maybe weeks. He watched her in silence. His arms folded, every part of him still argued, "This is dangerous." But watching her eat, watching her hold the bowl close like it was treasure, his decision became clear. She was not an enemy. She was a victim, and he could not throw her out to die. When she finished, she placed the bowl down carefully and bowed her head. "Why?" she asked softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why? Why? Why did you let me stay? Why give me food?" She whispered. "Humans do not help my kind." They only punish. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at her. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I'm tired of rules that make no sense. Maybe I see someone broken and I can't walk away. Her eyes glistened. And for the first time, she looked at him without fear. There was still caution, but also something new hope. But Daniel knew the danger was real. If anyone found out, the guards would come. And they would not ask questions. They would take her away, and him too. He looked at her again, wrapped in the blanket. Sitting small and fragile in his chair, could he protect her? Could he hide her from the eyes of the town? As the fire in the stove burned low, Daniel made his choice. You will stay here tonight, he said firmly. Tomorrow, we will decide what to do next. The alien girl gasped, her lips parting. You would let me stay? Daniel nodded once, his voice cold but sure. But you must be quiet. You must obey what I say if you want to survive. You do not open that door, not for anyone. She clutched the blanket tighter and whispered, I promise. Daniel stood. Walking to the window, outside, the night still looked calm, but his instincts told him trouble would come soon. Somewhere out there, someone was searching for her. And by choosing to help her, he had stepped into a storm. But it was too late to turn back. For the first time in years, his lonely house was not empty, and he knew deep inside. His life had just changed forever. The alien story of the fire in the small stove crackled softly, sending shadows dancing across the wooden walls. Daniel sat in his chair, his eyes fixed on the strange girl wrapped in the old blanket. She sat quietly, her head lowered, as if afraid to even breathe too loudly. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence heavy with questions that begged for answers. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Who are you? He asked, his voice calm but steady. The girl flinched at his words, her hands tightening around the blanket. Her lips opened, then closed, as if she wasn't sure if she should speak. I told you, she whispered. I have no name. Daniel frowned, leaning forward. Everyone has a name, he said. Even if it's one you chose for yourself. She shook her head slowly, her long, tangled hair falling into her face. Not me, she whispered. Not anymore. Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. It was clear she carried a story. One she was afraid to tell. But if he was going to risk everything by hiding her, he needed to understand why she was here. Then tell me, he said. Firmly, tell me what happened to you. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her breath shaking, she looked toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Then her eyes returned to his face, searching for something. Trust, perhaps, or mercy. And slowly she began to speak. I was taken, she whispered. Taken from my family when I was still young. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself. To continue, they said I was strong, useful, and that I could serve. They put me in chains and sold me like an object. Her fingers tightened on the blanket until her knuckles turned pale. Daniel's jaw clenched. He had heard stories of such things happening in distant colonies. But hearing it from her lips made his stomach twist. You were sold as a slave, he said quietly. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, a slave. I cleaned floors, carried water, and served meals. If I was too slow, they hit me. If I spoke without permission, they struck me. And when I begged for mercy, they laughed. Her words cut into Daniel. Like a blade, he could see it in her posture. In her scars, this was not a lie. She had lived through cruelty most people could not even imagine. I escaped one night, she continued, her voice gaining strength as the memory returned. There was chaos in the camp, and I ran. I ran without food, without water, without shoes. I thought maybe I could hide. Maybe I could find kindness. Somewhere, she looked down at her filthy hands. Trembling, but everywhere I went, they chased me. To them, I am just property. Nothing more than a tool to be used until I break. Daniel's fists tightened, his heart pounding with anger. This girl had suffered enough to break any soul, and yet she was still here, still breathing, still fighting in her own way. But what struck him most was what she had risked for. She hadn't broken into his home for food or gold. She had broken in only for water, just to feel clean again, to remind herself she was alive. "Why my house?" Daniel asked, his voice softer now. She glanced at him, then quickly looked away. "I watched," she admitted. "I saw you return home every night. You never shouted, never beat anyone. You seemed different. I thought maybe if I tried here, you would not kill me right away." Her words hit him harder than a blade. She had chosen his house not because it was safe, but because she hoped his face belonged to someone who still had a little mercy left. Daniel sat back, his breath heavy. For years, he had lived alone, closing himself away from the world. But now the universe had forced this fragile, broken creature into his life. And her story demanded something from him, something he wasn't sure he was ready to give. The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know I should not." "Stay," she said quietly. "They will come looking for me, and if they find me here, they will hurt you too. I don't want that." Her voice cracked on the last words. Daniel saw the truth. She was willing to run back into the night, even if it meant death, just to protect him. She thought her life had no value, that she was a burden not worth saving. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes burning with determination. "You are wrong," he said firmly. Her eyes widened, startled by the strength in his voice. "You are not nothing," he continued. "You are not property, and you are not a burden. They may have treated you like dirt. But here, in my house, you are not dirt." Tears filled her eyes again, spilling down her cheeks. Her lips trembled. As if no one had ever spoken to her this way, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. You see me?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "I see you, and as long as you are here, I will not let anyone take you back." The fire crackled louder as if answering his words. Outside, the night seemed calm, but Daniel knew storm. Clouds were gathering. This girl's story was not just her past, it was a warning. If she was being hunted, they would come, and when they did, he would have to stand between her and the world. For now, she rested by the fire, her eyes slowly closing from exhaustion, her breathing softened, her body relaxing for the first time in years. And Daniel sat in silence, watching over her. His choice had been made. Her story had become his story, and whatever came next, he would not let her face it alone. A dangerous secret. The night dragged on. But Daniel did not sleep. He sat in his chair, staring into the dying fire, listening to the quiet breathing of the alien girl wrapped in the blanket. She had fallen asleep, her face soft and calm for the first time. But Daniel's mind was far from calm. Her story still echoed inside. Him, sold like an object, beaten like an animal, forced to run until her body nearly broke. It made his blood burn with anger. But it also made him realize something dangerous. If she had escaped, then someone would be looking for her. No one throws away property willingly. She was valuable to whoever owned her, and they would not rest until she was dragged back in chains. Daniel rose to his feet and quietly moved to the window. The moonlight fell across the town, the dirt road shining faintly in the silver glow. At first, everything looked peaceful, but then he noticed movement, shadows slipping between houses. Two figures walked slowly, carrying lanterns, their eyes searching, scanning the ground, even from here. Daniel could see their uniforms, hunters. His chest tightened. They were already here, moving from door to door. The girl had not been free for long before her captors had begun to hunt her, and now their search had brought them dangerously close. He turned back to look at her, still asleep, unaware of the danger pressing in. For a moment, Doubt clawed at him. If they discovered her here, they would not only punish her, they would punish him too. They would call him a traitor for hiding. An alien, and the law would be merciless. It would be safer to wake her, push her out the back door, and pretend he had never seen her. But when his eyes fell on the girl's fragile form, her thin arms clutching the blanket like it was her last shield, Daniel knew he could not do it. He could not send her out to be hunted like an animal. No matter what the cost, the hunters' voices carried faintly through the night air. Check. Every corner, she cannot have gone far. One muttered, the other grunted. The master wants her alive, but if she resists, it doesn't matter. Their laughter was low, cruel, and sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He stepped away from the window, his heart pounding. The girl stirred at the sound of the floor creaking. Her eyes opening slightly, she blinked, confusion giving way to alarm as she saw Daniel's tense face. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Hunters," Daniel said softly, his tone sharp and urgent. "They're already in the town." Her body stiffened, fear flashing across her face. "No," she breathed, her voice breaking. "They found me so soon." She clutched the blanket tighter, panic flooding her eyes. "I should go. I must go before they find me here. You cannot risk this." Daniel grabbed her wrist firmly, but not harshly. "No," he said, his voice like stone. "If you go out now, they will catch you. If you stay quiet, we may have a chance." She shook her head desperately, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You do not understand. They will hurt you too." "They will," Daniel cut her off. "Let them try." The strength in his words made her fall silent, her lips trembling. He released her wrist and stood tall, his eyes hard. "I will not hand you over. Not tonight, not ever." The girl stared at him, stunned. She had expected fear, rejection, betrayal. Instead, she found something she had never seen before: defiance. He was not afraid of them, at least not enough to give her up. The hunters' voices grew louder as they approached another house. Daniel motioned for the girl to move. He guided her toward a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug in the corner of the room. It opened to a small storage space where he kept old tools and firewood. "Get inside," he whispered. She hesitated, fear making her hands shake. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his tone sharp. Her eyes met his, and after a moment, she nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, and climbed into the dark space below. Daniel lowered the trapdoor carefully and covered it with the rug again. Moments later, there was a heavy knock on the door. The sound echoed through the small house, making the walls shake. Daniel's jaw tightened. He grabbed the metal rod he had used earlier and held it loosely in his hand. He walked to the door and opened it a crack. Two hunters stood outside, their lanterns casting harsh light on their faces. One was tall, with a scar running down his cheek, the other short but broad, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Evening," the tall one said, his tone false and friendly. "We're searching for someone." Daniel kept his face calm, his voice steady. "Someone," he repeated. The shorter hunter stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "A runaway," he said bluntly. "An alien, female, dirty, bruised. Have you seen her?" Daniel's grip on the rod tightened, but he forced his shoulders to stay relaxed. "No," he said simply. "I've seen no one. I live alone. Always have." The hunters exchanged a look. The tall one leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room behind Daniel. "Mind if we take a look?" he asked, his voice casual, but with steel beneath it. Daniel's heart pounded. If they searched the house, they might discover the trapdoor. But he also knew if he refused, it would raise suspicion. For a long moment, he stood in silence. Then, he stepped aside, his voice calm. "Go ahead," he said. "Search if you must. But you will find nothing here." The hunters entered, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. As they began to move through the house, opening cupboards and peering, In two corners, Daniel stood still, his eyes never leaving them beneath the floor. The alien girl held her breath in the darkness, her heart racing. Every creak of the floorboards above made her flinch. Every voice sent terror through her chest. And Daniel, standing guard in his own home, knew the truth. This was no longer about choice. He was already part of her fight. And if the hunters discovered his secret, both their lives would change forever. Trust between them, the hunters searched the house carefully, opening every cupboard, lifting blankets, and tapping on the walls. Daniel followed them closely, his face calm, his heart racing. He prayed they would not notice the trapdoor hidden under the rug. Every second felt like an hour, every movement of their lanterns like a blade cutting through his chest. Finally, after a long silence, the tall hunter shook his head. "Nothing," he muttered. The shorter one narrowed his eyes at Daniel, as if trying to see through his calm expression. "You live alone?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel replied firmly. "Always have." The man studied him for a moment longer, then finally turned away. "We'll check the next house," he said. The two hunters left, their boots echoing on the dirt road as they moved farther into the night. Daniel closed the door softly and let out a breath he had been holding. His hands were damp with sweat, but his face remained steady. He walked quickly to the trapdoor and lifted it. The girl's wide eyes looked up at him from the dark, her face pale, her lips trembling. She had been holding her breath the whole time. "Are they gone?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "For now," Daniel said, helping her climb out. She clutched the blanket tightly, her hands still shaking. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I thought they would find me. I thought you would hand me over." Daniel's eyes softened. "I told you," he said quietly. "I won't give you up." Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the floor, covering her face with her hands. Daniel knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You're safe here," he said, "but you must trust me, and you must stay quiet." She lowered her hands, looking at him through her tears. "Why?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why risk yourself for me? You don't even know my name. You don't even know who I am." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. "You told me your story," he said. "That's enough. I know what they did too. And I know you don't deserve it." His voice grew firm. "That's all I need to know." Her lips trembled as she whispered, No one has ever said that to me before." She looked down, clutching the blanket tighter. "All my life, I was told I was worthless. I believed it, but you—" Her voice broke. "You make me feel like I am someone." The firelight flickered between them, filling the small room with warmth. For the first time, she smiled faintly, though her eyes were still wet with tears. It was a small, fragile smile, but it carried something powerful: hope. Daniel rose and walked to the table. Pulling out a small loaf of bread, he tore a piece and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it carefully, as though afraid it might vanish, as she ate slowly. Daniel sat across from her, his eyes watching. He noticed how she tried not to eat too fast, though hunger pulled at her every bite. Even broken, she carried dignity. "Tomorrow," Daniel said, his voice low, "we will plan. You can't stay in the open forever, but for tonight, you're safe." The girl nodded slowly, chewing the bread in silence. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time, they did not carry only fear. There was something else: trust. Later, when the fire dimmed and the house grew quiet again, the girl moved to the corner where the blanket was laid out. She sat down and whispered, "May I clean something?" "Your house." "I want to help." Daniel frowned. "You don't have to," but she insisted. "I want to. You gave me food, warmth, and safety. Let me give something back. Even if it is small." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He watched as she carefully straightened the chairs, folded the blanket neatly, and wiped the table with her sleeve. Her movements were gentle, almost ceremonial. It was clear that for her, even these small acts carried meaning. She was trying to prove she was not just a burden. When she finished, she sat quietly again. Her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," she whispered softly, "for treating me like I matter." Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Something he had not felt in years. He had lived alone for so long, but now, with her presence, the silence of his home no longer felt empty. Outside, however, danger still loomed. The hunters would not give up so easily. Rumors were already beginning to spread. Some claimed a stranger had been seen near the edges of town. Others whispered that a human might be hiding her. The noose was tightening, and Daniel knew it. But as he looked at the alien girl curled in the corner, finally resting with a soft breath of peace, he made a silent promise he would protect her. No matter what it cost, she trusted him now. And that trust was not something he could betray. The bond between them had been born not in comfort, but in fear. And yet, it was stronger than either of them had expected. For her, he was the first human who saw her as more than property. For him, she was a reminder of humanity itself, the reason rules could be broken and laws defied. The night moved on. The fire burned lower, and outside, the hunters still searched, but inside the little house, a fragile thread of trust had been woven. And Daniel knew that thread would soon be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The confrontation the next morning came with heavy silence. Daniel opened his eyes to the faint light of dawn slipping through the cracks in the shutters. For a moment, everything looked normal, the same wooden walls, the same quiet room, the same smell of burned-out fire. But then he saw the girl curled on the floor, wrapped in the old blanket. Her thin chest rising and falling slowly. Reality struck him again. She was still here. And the danger was still outside. Daniel rose carefully, not wanting to wake her. He stepped outside to fetch water from the well, his eyes scanning the street. It was empty. But the silence was not peaceful. It felt tense, heavy, as though the town itself was holding its breath. By noon, rumors had reached his ears. The hunters had not left. They were still in the town, searching house by house, and now they carried written orders. Anyone caught hiding the runaway alien would be punished publicly. Anyone who resisted would be executed. Daniel's stomach tightened as he carried the water back inside. The girl looked up at him when he entered, her eyes wide with unspoken fear. "They are still here, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Daniel placed the bucket down and nodded once. "They won't stop until they find you." Her hands clutched the blanket tightly, her knuckles pale. "Then I should leave," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I will not let you die because of me." But Daniel shook his head firmly. "If you walk out there, you won't last an hour, and if they drag you back, you will never be free again." He looked at her with hard eyes. "You asked me why I help you? This is the answer because someone has to? Because if no one does, then what does it mean to be human?" Her lips trembled and tears welled in her eyes before she could reply. A loud pounding shook the door. The sound echoed through the small house like thunder. The girl flinched, shrinking back into the corner. Daniel's heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He walked to the door and opened it slowly. This time, it was not just two hunters. 4 men stood outside, their uniforms dark, their boots muddy, each holding a weapon behind them. A 5th man waited on a black horse. Clearly, their leader, the scarred hunter from the night before, stepped forward, his eyes sharp. "Morning," he said coldly. "We have orders to search again." Daniel blocked the doorway, his shoulders straight. "You already searched my home," he said calmly. The hunter smirked. "Then you have nothing to hide, do you?" Without waiting for permission, he shoved past Daniel and stepped inside. The others followed, their boots heavy on the floorboards. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself deeper into the corner, clutching the blanket. Like armor, her wide eyes locked on the men, terror freezing her body. Daniel stepped forward quickly. Placing himself between the hunters and her, "You will not touch her," he said firmly. His voice sharp as steel, the scarred hunter raised an eyebrow, smirking. "So it's true," he said. "The lonely man has a secret guest." He tilted his head toward the girl. "She belongs to us." He said, "Step aside, human." Daniel gripped the metal rod tightly, his jaw clenched. "She belongs to no one." He snapped, his voice loud and firm. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the girl's shaky breathing. The hunters exchanged looks, then laughed cruelly. "You're a fool." The shorter one spat. "Do you know what they'll do to you for this?" Daniel's grip tightened on the rod, but he did not move. "If you want her," he said, his voice low and deadly, "you will have to go through me." The hunters sneered, raising their weapons. The leader on the horse outside called in, his voice like thunder, "Take the alien, kill the man if he resists." In that instant, the room exploded with chaos. The first hunter lunged forward, swinging his weapon. Daniel blocked it with the rod. The metal ringing in the air, the impact, sent pain through his arms. But he held his ground. He shoved the man back, knocking him into the table, which splintered under the force. The second hunter charged, but Daniel swung the rod with all his strength. It cracked against the man's side, sending him crashing to the floor. Gasping in pain, the girl cried out, but Daniel's voice cut through the noise. "Stay down. Don't move." The third hunter tried to grab her, but Daniel threw himself in the way. The man's blade cut across Daniel's arm, drawing blood, but Daniel didn't falter. With a roar, he slammed the rod against the hunter's chest, sending him stumbling back. The fourth one hesitated, his eyes narrowing. This was not the frightened villager they had expected. This was a man fighting with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. Outside, the leader dismounted his horse, watching the chaos. With cold eyes, his voice rang out, "Enough. Bring them both out here." Daniel's chest heaved, sweat running down his face, blood dripping from his arm. But his eyes burned with defiance as he raised the rod again. Behind him, the alien girl stared at him in shock, her lips trembling. No one had ever stood for her like this before. No one had ever fought for her. The hunters regrouped, circling him. The leader stepped into the doorway, his shadow falling across the room. "Last chance, human," he said coldly. "Step aside and live, or die for her." Daniel spat blood onto the floor, his grip steady. "I told you," he growled. "You'll go through me first." The girl's heart pounded, tears streaming down her face. She whispered through the fear, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Daniel's answer was short, sharp, and full of fire. "Because you are worth it." The hunters lunged again, and the house became a storm of violence. But this time, Daniel did not stand alone. Neighbors, hearing the fight, began to gather outside. Some shouted, some gasped, but one by one, a few men and women stepped forward, holding tools and sticks. They saw one of their own, standing against cruelty, and something inside them stirred. For years, they had obeyed in silence, afraid of punishment. But tonight, one man's defiance gave them courage. The confrontation was no longer just between Daniel and the hunters. It was between humanity itself and those who would crush it, and the outcome would change everything. Humanity shines. The wooden house shook with the clash of men. Daniel swung his metal rod again, striking the scarred hunter's shoulder, sending him stumbling back. Blood dripped from Daniel's arm where the blade had cut him earlier, but his grip did not weaken. Behind him, the alien girl crouched in the corner, her wide eyes filled with terror and awe. The leader of the hunters stood in the doorway, his cold gaze fixed on Daniel. "You are a fool," he hissed. "She is property. She is nothing. Why risk your life for her?" Daniel's chest rose and fell heavily, but his voice was sharp. "She is not property," he growled. "She is not nothing. She is someone, and she is under my protection." The words carried through the air like fire. Outside neighbors, who had gathered to watch the chaos froze, they heard him. And something stirred in their hearts. One by one, they stepped closer. Their fear beginning to melt away. The scarred hunter lunged again, but before he could strike, a man from the crowd shouted, "Enough!" He grabbed a wooden staff from his cart and ran forward. Others followed, men and women with hammers, axes, and farming tools. They flooded into the house, surrounding Daniel, their eyes fierce. They had been silent for too long, but Daniel's defiance had lit a flame inside them. The hunters looked around in shock. They had expected one man to crush, not a crowd. "Step aside," the leader barked, "or you will all be punished." But no one moved. An old woman raised her voice, her hands gripping a broom like a weapon. "No more," she said. "No more chains. No more cruelty. We will not let you take her." The alien girl gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. For the first time, she saw humans not as masters, not as tormentors, but as protectors. Her heart trembled, and tears blurred her vision. She whispered softly, They stand for me," the hunters snarled, raising their weapons. But Daniel stepped forward, his rod steady, his voice like iron. "You wanted her," he shouted. "Then you face all of us, because she is not alone anymore." The crowd roared in agreement, their voices filling the street. The hunters hesitated, fear flashing in their eyes. They were outnumbered, and worse, they were outmatched not by weapons, but by will. The leader clenched his jaw, his pride burning. "You will regret this," he spat. Turning his horse sharply, he signaled his men, and reluctantly, the hunters pulled back. Their boots thudded heavily as they retreated. Muttering curses under their breath, the crowd followed them to the edge of town, shouting, "Never again! Never again!" When the last of the hunters disappeared into the distance, silence fell. Then cheers erupted, filling the air with power and hope. Daniel lowered his rod, his body aching, blood still dripping from his wound, but his heart burned. With something greater than pain victory, the alien girl stepped forward slowly, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. She looked at Daniel with eyes full of emotion. You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking, "not just me. You showed me I am not worthless." Daniel looked at her, his tired face softening. "I only did what was right," he said. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, you did more than that. You gave me dignity. You gave me a place where I was not dirt." She fell to her knees, bowing her head. "I will never forget this, human." The townspeople gathered around her, their voices gentle now. "You are safe here," one woman said. "You are one of us now," another man added. The girl's lips trembled as she lifted her head, staring at them in disbelief. Her whole life had been chains and cruelty. Now she was being offered protection, acceptance, even belonging. Daniel helped her to her feet, his grip steady. He looked at the crowd, his voice firm. "They will come again," he warned. "They will not forget this night, but if we stand together, they cannot break us." The people nodded, their faces hard with new courage. For years they had lived under fear, but one runaway alien and one man's choice to protect her had changed everything. Later, when the crowd dispersed, the alien girl sat by the fire again. Her eyes followed Daniel as he stitched the cut on his arm. She spoke softly. "You could have given me up, and no one would have blamed you, but you didn't. Why?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes calm but full of weight. "Because humanity is not about fear or cruelty," he said. It is about choosing what is right, even when it costs everything. Her chest tightened, her heart heavy with emotion. In her world, humans had been monsters. But here, in this small house, a human had become her savior. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. For the first time, she believed she could have a future. The fire flickered, casting warm light. Across their faces, the alien girl whispered, "I thought I had nothing left, but now I have hope." Daniel nodded slowly, his voice quiet but strong, "And as long as you're here, you'll never lose it again." The night outside was calm now, the hunters gone. But in the small human town, something greater had begun. One act of courage had shattered fear. One runaway alien had found a family. And one man had proven to her and to everyone what it truly meant to be human.